Hi, welcome to Robby's Reading Club. So during their teens, most literate people read well over 100 novels. Several of those novels were probably classics, so written over 100 years ago. Reading classics helps develop a higher level of fluency and a broader vocabulary. It's a way of crossing cultural gaps to understand people who spoke, thought, and experienced the world in ways much different from the way people do today. This reading is for adults who may speak English fluently, but who were educated in other languages and experienced their 100-plus novels in another language and missed some of the richness of older English texts. It's also for teens who are just starting their literary journey. We'll stop after each paragraph to discuss the meaning and nuance of the text, along with historical references. I chose this story by O. Henry because it's short and sweet, with some uncommon words and usages. In other stories, he shows off a more sophisticated vocabulary that'll be fun to explore in future readings. One more thing, I'll be defining words in the context of this text. You should always look up unfamiliar words in a good dictionary to see all the various shades of meaning. O. Henry is the pen name of William Sidney Porter, an American short story writer who was born in North Carolina in 1816 and died in 1910. He had a difficult life. I encourage you to read more about that elsewhere. Start with Wikipedia. He'd been writing to earn money on the side for years, then dedicated more time to writing when he was in prison. After his release from prison, he arrived in New York in 1902 at the age of 40 and started writing short stories for weekly magazines. He wrote many sad and romantic stories of ordinary people in New York City. O. Henry wrote over 100 short stories, but I'll be reading from a selection titled The Gift of the Magi and Other Short Stories. The Last Leaf by O. Henry. In a little district west of Washington Square, the streets have run crazy and broken themselves to small strips called places. These places make strange angles and curves. One street crosses itself a time or two. An artist once discovered a valuable possibility in the street. Suppose a collector with a bill for paints, paper, and canvas should, in traversing this route, suddenly meet himself coming back, without a cent having been paid on account. Today, New York University owns most of the buildings around Washington Square, but at that time it was an upper-middle-class residential neighborhood with lower-income housing to the east and to the west. The streets have run crazy. So these are older streets in lower Manhattan that were established before 1811, when the orthogonal New York City street grid was adopted. At one point, Waverly Place crosses Waverly Place. There may be other examples of streets intersecting the same street. And traversing is to move over, along, or through, like traversing the globe. So, to quaint old Greenwich Village, the art people soon came prowling, hunting for north windows and 18th century gables, and Dutch attics and low rents. Then they imported some pewter mugs and a chafing dish or two from 6th Avenue and became a colony. Quaint means old-fashioned and oddly or amusingly picturesque. Prowling is to go stealthily like a predator in search of prey or something to steal. North windows. Visual artists, specifically painters, prefer indirect north light. Gables are the end of a pitched roof. Dutch attics. A Dutch hip roof is a common hip and gable roof, but that's not common to Manhattan. There are several references to Dutch architectural styles that I don't understand, but I'll note that New York City was originally a Dutch colony, so a Henry may be implying an old and rustic charm. A chafing dish is a tabletop hot plate that uses an alcohol burner to warm food. 6th Avenue was famous as the ladies' mile of department stores. You can still see my favorite, an Italianate cast iron Hugh O'Neill building on 6th Avenue and 20th Street. Really a fantastic building. And colony is used to suggest a colony of artists. At the top of a squatty, 3-story brick, Sue and Chauncey had their studio. Chauncey was familiar for Joanna. One was from Maine, the other from California. They had met at the table d'hote of an 8th Street Delmonico's and found their tastes in art, chicory salad, and bishop sleeves so congenial that this joint studio resulted. So Chauncey was familiar for Joanna, means it's a nickname. Squatty, short and thick, low and broad or squat. A 3-story brick. That's in English as a second language trapped, he leaves out the object. It's a 3-story brick building. The other from California. So being from Maine implied provincial, and at that time, being from California was provincial too, unlike today. California was still relatively newly developed compared to New York. Table d'hôte, in this case, meaning an inn where guests ate at a common table, so you might eat together at a table with strangers. And bishop sleeves are baggy towards the end and drawn together in cuffs. And 8th Street Delmonico's. At the time, Delmonico's was perhaps the finest restaurant in New York. So an 8th Street Delmonico's is a restaurant in the poor neighborhood that poor people would consider a really fancy restaurant. That was in May. In November, a cold, unseen stranger, whom the doctors called pneumonia, stalked about the colony, touching one here and there with his icy fingers. Over on the east side, this ravager strode boldly, smiting his victims by scores, but his feet trod slowly through the maze of the narrow and moss-grown places. So pneumonia, that's the spelling is adopted from the original Greek. Stalked is to follow as closely as possible without being seen or heard as a hunter stalking his prey. The east side of Manhattan had larger blocks with bigger tenement buildings, crowded with people, perfect for contagious diseases to spread. A ravager is someone who does devastating and destructive damage. And smiting is striking hard with a stick or a weapon. Mr. Pneumonia was not what you would call a chivalric old gentleman. A mite of a little woman, with blood thinned by California zephyrs, was hardly fair game for the red-fisted, short-breathed old duffer. But Chauncey he smote, and she lay, scarcely moving, on her painted iron bedstead, looking through the small Dutch window panes at the blank side of the next brick house. So chivalric is chivalrous, courteous, courageous, gallant, and loyal. A duffer is a plodding, clumsy, incompetent person, plodding like is walking heavily and with great effort. Smote is the past tense of smite, struck hard with a stick or weapon, and again, Dutch window panes is this sort of historical reference. It may just mean small window panes divided by mullions. One morning, the busy doctor invited Sue into the hallway with a shaggy gray eyebrow. So it's just he raised his eyebrow to demonstrate. She has one chance in, let us say, 10, he said, as he shook down the mercury in his clinical thermometer. And that chance is for her to want to live. This way people have of lining up on the side of the undertaker makes the entire pharmacopoeia look silly. Your little lady has made up her mind that she's not going to get well. Has she anything on her mind? So he shook down the mercury in the thermometer. An undertaker is a mortician or a funeral director who takes care of dead bodies. Lining up on the side of the undertaker is she's accepting and waiting for death. And a pharmacopoeia is a technical reference of medicine. She wanted to paint the Bay of Naples someday, said Sue. Paint? Bosh. Has she anything on her mind worth thinking about twice? A man, for instance? A man, said Sue, with a Jew's harp twang in her voice. Is a man? But no, doctor, there is nothing of that kind. Is a man worth living for? This is an early stage of feminism. And a Jew's harp is a musical instrument you hold in your mouth. And it uses your mouth as a sound box, and it makes a twanging sound. Twanging. So a man? Well, it is the weakness then, said the doctor. I will do all its science, so far as it may filter through my efforts can accomplish. But whenever my patient begins to count the carriages in her funeral procession, I subtract 50% from the curative power of medicines. If you will get her to ask one question about the new winter styles and cloak sleeves, I will promise you a 1 in 5 chance for her instead of 1 in 10. Subtract 50%? Why the period after cent? It's not the end of the sentence. I think that's an abbreviation of centile. Today we write percent as one word, but he has it broken into 2. After the doctor had gone, Sue went into the workroom and cried a Japanese napkin into a pulp. Then she swaggered into Johnson's room with a drawing board, whistling ragtime. So she cried a Japanese napkin into a pulp, and then she cried so much that this paper disintegrated, and then ragtime was a popular musical style around 1900. So she's basically got very emotional and covered up her emotions when she went in to seem cheerful when she went in to see Chauncey. Chauncey lay, scarcely making a ripple under the bedclothes, with her face toward the window. Sue stopped whistling, thinking she was asleep, scarcely making a ripple. So she's so exhausted and tired that she's barely moving at all because she's so sick. She arranged her board and began a pen and ink drawing to illustrate a magazine story. Young artists must pave their way to art by drawing pictures for magazine stories that young authors write to pave their way to literature. Magazines didn't use photographs at this time. Photography existed, but it couldn't be reproduced so easily, so magazines used line drawings. Art with a capital A and literature with a capital L, implying the higher art forms of those. And young artists supported their careers working as illustrators, while young writers supported their careers writing serial novels. So in their pursuit of higher art and higher literature, they took on more mundane, like practical, everyday forms of the arts. As Sue was sketching a pair of elegant horse-show riding trousers and a monocle on the figure of a hero, an Idaho cowboy, she heard a low sound, several times repeated. She went quickly to the bedside. This is a fashion mishmash. Cowboys don't wear elegant horse-show riding trousers and monocles. I think it's just throwing together a lot of popular images from the time that are totally irrelevant to the story. Johnsie's eyes were wide open. She was looking at the window and counting backward. 12, she said, and then a little later 11, and then 10, and 9, and then 8 and 7, almost together. So comment just on grammar. I don't like the way O. Henry uses commas, but I accept it as artistic license. In this sentence, I question his use of commas and semicolons. Please consult a grammarian before copying his style. Sue looked solicitously out the window. What was there to count? There was only a bare, dreary yard to be seen, and the blank side of the brick house 20 feet away. An old ivy vine, gnarled and decayed at the roots, climbed up the brick wall. The cold breath of autumn had stricken its leaves from the vine until its skeleton branches clung almost bare to the crumbling rocks. So solicitously is anxious or concerned. Gnarled is bent and twisted like tree roots and having a rugged and weather-beaten appearance. Stricken now means hit or wounded by a weapon, but I think that he's using an older, more literal meaning of struck or knocked off. What is it, dear? Said Sue. 6, said Johnsy, almost in a whisper. They're falling faster now. 3 days ago, there were almost 100. It made my head ache to count them, but now it's easy. There goes another one. There are only 5 left now. This is a direct correlation to a patient counting the carriages in her funeral procession. 5 of what, dear? Tell Sooty. Leaves on the ivy vine. When the last one falls, I must go too. I've known that for 3 days. Didn't the doctor tell you? So Sooty is just a childish pronunciation. Oh, I've never heard such nonsense, complained Sue, with magnificent scorn. What have old ivy leaves to do with your getting well? And you used to love that vine so, you naughty girl. Don't be a goosey. Why, the doctor told me this morning that your chances for getting well real soon were... Let's see exactly what he said. He said the chances were 10 to 1. Why, that's almost as good a chance as we have in New York when we ride on the streetcars or walk past a new building. Try to take some broth now and let Sooty go back to her drawing so she can sell the editor man with it and buy port wine for her sick child and pork chops for her greedy self. Goosey is an idiomatic expression. Silly goose means a silly person or a simpleton. As good a chance as when we ride on streetcars or walk past a new building. I think it must have been dangerous riding on streetcars. People may have fallen off or been hit by them. And walking by new buildings, perhaps. They were men were still working on the buildings and things would fall from the facades. You needn't get any more wine, said Chauncey, keeping her eyes fixed out the window. There goes another one. No, I don't want any broth. That leaves just 4. I want to see the last one fall before it gets dark. Then I'll go too. Then I'll go too means I'll die. Johnsy, dear, said Sue, bending over her, will you promise me to keep your eyes closed and not look out the window until I am done working? I must hand those drawings in by tomorrow. I need the light, or I would draw the shade down. Couldn't you draw in the other room? Asked Johnsy coldly. I'd rather be here by you, said Sue. Besides, I don't want you to keep looking at those ivy leaves. So to draw is to pull down. Tell me as soon as you have finished, said Johnsy, closing her eyes and lying white and still as a fallen statue, because I want to see the last one fall. I'm tired of waiting. I'm tired of thinking. I went to turn loose my hold on everything and go sailing down, down, just like one of those poor tired leaves. So it should, like, interesting change of tense. She says, I want to, and then I went to turn loose, like in the past tense. Try to sleep, said Sue. I must call Berman up to be my model for the old hermit miner. I'll not be gone a minute. Don't try to move till I come back.